I know there may be some colleagues who are new to WJEC, so I'll try and, I hope, give you some pointers about the way the exam works, but also some things that I hope you can take back into the department and back into the classroom so that you can reassure colleagues about the way the new spec exams are working or will work for January and May next year, but also some of the kind of, I'm sure, what will now be familiar messages. The two booklets that I'm going to make reference to in the pack are booklets 5 and 6, and they contain the papers themselves and the mark schemes, and we've put some exemplar materials together. You'll see in booklet 6 that those exemplar materials are unannotated, so you can obviously photocopy those and use them with students and so on. There will be the annotated versions of all of those materials put on the secure website, so you can get the marks and where the ticks go and so on and so forth, so that you can use those with the department, and obviously you've got those versions to use with students as well. Okay, a couple of things to say really, and I'll start with my almost boringly familiar messages that I always start when I'm working with students, when I'm in the class, and I also use when I'm working with a department. And that is that for these exams, they haven't changed from what we've done in the legacy spec. All you've got now is 2 one-hour papers rather than the old paper 2, which was a 2-hour paper. All that's happened is they've had a cleaver put down the middle, so the unit 1 is the reading section with their familiar 4 or 5 questions adding up to 40 marks, and the writing unit, unit 2, which again, 2 writing tasks giving a total of 40 marks. So nothing has changed there. I've got to say that I thought when we made the decision to separate the reading and the writing unit, that would be a good thing, because it would mean that students would be absolutely focused on each unit for the right amount of time. And we wouldn't be in the situation where students ended up with incomplete papers. What we found in the in the new spec exams is that actually quite a lot of candidates on both tiers didn't complete the reading papers. And probably what's been happening in the past is that they've been pinching a bit of time from the notional hour and using that and writing perhaps a bit less on some of the writing tasks. And I have seen some quite long writing pieces that suggest that if they've got 30 minutes to write, a lot of candidates can actually fill a side and a half fairly comfortably. So that is an issue. So they need practice. So in a sense, my 3 key messages that I always start when I'm working with students in the class would be, 1, in terms of the reading, you have got to read the passages carefully, methodically, line by line, sentence by sentence, but quickly. They have to understand that reading line by line will give them the material that they need then to use in their responses. So, reading methodically. Don't miss anything. Know what you're looking for. Second message is time management. And if they've got 1 hour and they've got 4 questions, they don't need to be an A-star maths student to know that will only give them 15 minutes per question. And that includes the reading, and then they've got to write their responses. So they've got to be efficient. They've got to check the watch. I was horrified in one school when I said, make sure you take your watch in. And they all said, we don't wear a watch anymore. We've got mobile phones, and we're not allowed to bring them in. So my advice to schools has been, make sure there is a big clock that the students can see. One of the schools that I work in put the clock on a visualizer on a 15-foot screen. So there is a clock that they couldn't avoid. And getting kids used to the idea they are working to a time limit, they've got to be able to do that. I don't know if there were many schools here that put students in for the new spec exams in June, but one of the things that I think would be worth asking is, did you do a mock? Did you put kids under that 1 hour pressure, little bit of a break, and then put them under another hour pressure so they know what it feels like? You know, I had some kids come out from the mocks that I was involved in and said, "Sir, my arm's aching, my arm's aching." And I said, "Well, you've probably done okay then, actually, because you should have, you know, your arm should be aching because you've had 2 hours of solid hard work." So that kind of thing, knowing that the time management issue is not going to catch them out. And the third thing that I'd say that is really important, and that is that your students and people in your department know how the marking works. And one of the things that I'd say is that we have never, or certainly as far as I'm absolutely aware with Ken Elliott on hire and myself putting the papers together, we've never tried to produce questions that will confuse or send students on the wrong track. So the questions that people saw in the new spec paper were pretty much like the questions they would have seen in the legacy paper. And the kinds of questions that we ask: what are the writer's thoughts and feelings? What impressions do you get? How does he try to persuade or to prove? Compare these two texts and those kind of things. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, the kinds of questions that we've used in the new spec papers. But I do want to point out some of the things that I think have become apparent as Mark has looked at these higher and foundation tier papers this year. They shouldn't have been anything unfamiliar. Somebody said at coffee, I see you use Bryson again. You know, Bryson is one of those kind of writers that is a very rich writer. There's always stuff for the high ability students to be able to recognise the way that he operates as a writer, but also there's plenty of material for the candidates who are in higher tier but are never going to get to the A star and the A grades. What impression does Bill Bryson create of Manchester as a city? Pretty straightforward. What does he think Manchester's like? So tell me the kinds of things that he thinks Manchester is like. Well, if you look at the passage, right from the beginning, he starts off by, for example, talking about it's got an attractive big city feel. It feels like a big city. On line 5 in the passage, it's enormous. It's filled with slow-moving traffic, so it's a busy, bustling place. That's an impression. That's what Manchester's like. And then he goes into what it's like as a place to go and eat. And he doesn't think much of the restaurants. So he talks about, he's really saying, when you go to Manchester, actually, the impression you get of the restaurants is a bit of a disappointment, a bit of a letdown. It's an expensive place to eat, and what you get is kind of those national chains of restaurants. It's fairly unimpressive. He talks, in about halfway down the page, of a number of kind of impressions that he gets. He talks about it's dank and dark, it's ill-lit. He talks about the streets being curiously indistinguishable. He felt he was in a kind of urban limbo. Now that's a pretty clear impression, a negative impression of Manchester. And then he starts to talk about some specific places. He talks about the Arndale Centre, and he thinks it's awful. He talks about the tiles on it making it look like the world's largest lavatory, is the expression he uses. He talks about Castlefield as a kind of fake traditional place. He doesn't think much of that either. And when he talks about Salford Quays, he's a bit disparaging in the way he talks about it as a kind of mini Dallas. Now there's lots of little quotations that I would highlight very quickly. When I'm working with the kids, I say, very quickly, highlight the kind of obvious things that you could say. Well, Manchester's like this. The impression of Manchester is that it is miserable, attractive, big city, run down, whatever it happens to be. Good students, well prepared, will use the word impression a number of times. I get the impression, Bryson gives the impression that it is this kind of city. Now, sadly, I saw a lot of candidates who never used that word at all. Now, that's, in a sense, a way in for students, because pretty much whatever follows is going to get some reward, if it's right, of course. But I did see quite a lot of candidates who kind of stabbed at the text. It told me things that were in Manchester, but not what is Manchester like. What impression do I get of Manchester? The other thing that I'll just very quickly raise while we're looking at that, or just thinking about that first question, is If candidates use quotation, that's useful because it supports assertion. Where it doesn't work is where they copy a big chunk of text, because they may hit on the right bit within that big chunk of text, but they're using time up, and they're still only going to get one little tick from the marker for using the quotation. Much better to be more precise and try to make the quotations as short as possible. Sometimes a single word will do, and there's examples of that that we'll perhaps look at in question 2. But certainly a short phrase, best avoided is that long sentence. Now, of course, one of the difficulties with Bryson is he uses quite long, complex sentences. So there were candidates who wrote something like a quarter of a page that was nothing more than a quotation. I've actually got one example that I photocopied. You know, here's a candidate who wrote a whole page for A1, but all of that is virtually one quotation. So using quotations effectively is a skill that some of the students, some of the candidates I saw, didn't have. The other danger is a little learning is a dangerous thing. I know how to use ellipsis. I'll put those dots in, and all I need to do is the beginning of the sentence and the end. Sometimes that doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense, there's not much point using it. I saw on one candidate who told me what he thinks about Manchester, and then a quotation, the problem with Manchester, ... none at all. Now, ellipsis is very useful, but in the wrong hands, it's like a loaded weapon, because they think they know that what the examiner is going to do is put a little tick against it. But if it doesn't make sense, it's not going to help them. I also saw a quotation, purposeful walk, ... darker city. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It would have been better to have quoted that half a sentence to do that. So they've got to be careful the way they use quotations. The best ones select exactly the right bit of detail, they embed them within the sentence, and they work fantastically well because immediately they pick up another tick from a marker that is going to help them to get a decent mark. When it comes to the second question, which was switching to the other text, that is the text that was the talking about how wonderful Manchester was now. The question was, how does the writer, how does Max Davidson try to prove that Manchester is a perfect city, perfect place for a city break? So in other words, it's one of those questions, it's a bit like, how does he try to persuade you to go? Now, it's not the same form of words, because it wasn't trying to persuade you, it wasn't a publicity leaflet, but it's that kind of question, how does the writer try to do something? So what I'm looking for here is content, and I'm looking for language. How does the writer use that language to do whatever the question's asking me? And the question is, how does he try to prove that Manchester's a good place for a city break? While Stuart was talking, I just thought, I'll just check how many places are mentioned in Manchester, because you could use that information in an answer. And as it happened, last week we were doing the Manchester inset, and we were talking about what a very pleasant place Manchester was, except they closed the door to the pub at 10:30 and then said, right, off you go, out you go, everybody out, which wasn't quite as attractive as the stuff that he was talking about in his passage. I counted 14 separate places that you could visit in Manchester that's in that leaflet. Now, I haven't highlighted those places, but I've highlighted the general things that could be used in an answer. There's a lot of stuff to use. And I always say to students, look, these passages, to some extent, may have been filleted, reduced, so that the irrelevant stuff is largely taken away, and what you're left with is stuff that you can use in your answer. So that's why the methodical reading, the careful but quick highlighting, underlining, whatever it happens to be, whatever they're comfortable with doing, in those few minutes they've got in terms of the reading, they can get on with it quickly. There were 14 places that I could go to in Manchester that were mentioned in that article. So, if the question says, how does he try to prove it's a great place, a perfect place for a city break, I'm going to see a lot of different things if I go. So I'm going to mention some of the places. Content, the content of the passage. It's not about, here we go back to what Stuart was saying, it's not about I'm going to Manchester because there's a bit of alliteration in here. I'm going to Manchester because there's the Metrolink or the Legoland Discovery Centre or the Lowry or Salford Quays or the Ship Canal. I'm going because of the places that are there that are going to be interesting. And he's going to tell me something about some of those places, and he's going to use language which makes those places attractive. And that's what I was highlighting as I sat in my couple of minutes as I'm reading it through. I'm looking for the places and the things he says. So he says about Manchester, were it in France or Germany, we would visit it in droves. He says it's accessible, reasonably compact, but with a bewildering variety of attractions. If I quoted that sentence, it's accessible, reasonably compact, with a bewildering variety of attractions, I'd get a mark from the marker for selecting, for spotting that that's worthy of some reward. If I break it down and say a little bit about the three separate things, I'll get more reward. The fact that it's accessible, the fact that it's reasonably compact, I can say something about that, and the fact that it's got a bewildering variety. That suggests all ages might find something, and I can use that as my comment, and I've got my bit of evidence. It's a bewildering variety. There's so much to do. I'm never going to be bored if I go to Manchester. But I have to tell you, I saw quite a number of candidates who never mentioned one attraction. Not one. Now that makes it hard for them. If they're never going to mention a single attraction, what else do you write about that would prove that Manchester's good? Well, alliteration figured pretty largely. Tripling put in a few appearances. There was a bit of onomatopoeia and stuff like that. They're not why I would go to Manchester. So again, being clear about what is the question asking me and how am I going to use this information from the text. Let's have a look at a couple of examples of candidates who did question 2 in booklet 6. On the first page. So, how does he prove, and I keep saying to kids, keep the question in your head, remember what the examiner's asking you to do. How does he try to prove that Manchester is a perfect place for a city break? Right, the title uses the phrase, another angel of the north. The use of the word angel has connotations of perfection and goodness, which helps to persuade the reader. Yeah, okay, I might go with that. It's not the thing that would necessarily, I'd rather go to the Lowry maybe, or even the Live Jazz Club, but okay, it makes it sound pretty perfect. I'll live with that, and I'd perhaps put a tick against that as well. The article goes on to explain why you have previously disagreed with it being a perfect place. By telling us that Manchester doesn't blow its own trumpet, this is also used to personify the city and make it seem more appealing to the reader. I'm just thinking now, so how does it do that? And what am I going to see? What makes it perfect? I haven't got anything to hang on to yet. Davidson continues to give the city human characteristics, and I'm beginning to think they're in trouble, such as shyness and playing the clown. They've lost the question. How does he make me want to go? He does this to help us to relate to the city and feel more drawn to it. Well, I still don't know why I'm going yet, really. A rule of 3, my heart is sinking, is used to describe how it is the perfect city break destination. Well, can't really find anything to reward. Now, it might have been that it's that accessible, and that sentence we looked at. So why not give me the sentence? Use the evidence, if you like, from the text to get the mark from the marker. This emphasises the point and helps the reader to remember the information. Still can't find anywhere to put my tick. When Davidson starts to talk about the opposing view, he immediately destroys the argument with a rhetorical question that addresses the reader as a friend. And I'm absolutely lost. I want to tick it, but I can't find anything to tick. This is used so the reader sides with the writer's point of view. Davidson rattles off various attractions. Now we're going to get something that are available to visit whilst using adjectives such as, and then we've got a couple of spotted details that are about the language. State of the art, funky, super stylish. Okay, I'll put a tick there because at least he spotted something from the text. These adjectives tell us just how good the attraction is. Well, actually, funky and super stylish do a bit more than that. So a little comment on that, perhaps about modern or a bit unusual, appeal to the young. They're the kind of comments that you would think that you could make about that use of language. Just in case you're still thinking about the opposing argument, well, I wasn't actually, Davidson says that the problem, the weather can be a good thing that adds to the coziness of the city. Oh, great, I'm going to get soaked. That's going to attract me. Davidson repeats the word perfect to make the reader agree with him. It adds emphasis to the title and persuades the reader. Now, what do I give that? I am in trouble here because as a marker, I'm poised with my pen and I can't give it, I can't find stuff. I've ticked the beginning because there was a little kind of stab at this notion, its connotations of perfection and goodness, which is not really very precise, but I want to be humane. I've ticked the language that he's selected or she's selected, but there's not much else. And I'm probably thinking, this is 2. If I'm really, 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 really kind, I might say 3. But 3 is approaching a D grade, and it doesn't feel like D grade to me. This candidate doesn't know what to do. Now, I don't know why they don't know what to do. Interesting that they never use the word impression. The notion of how he proves it. He proves it by saying this. If you flick over the page, we won't have time to look at all of them, but if you look at the third one, which is on page 3, it's probably a bit shorter than the first one. Still only got 10 minutes to get this writing done, or 12 minutes or whatever. Max Davidson starts to prove that Manchester is a perfect place for a city break by saying that the people are not slow to laugh at themselves. This gives the impression that the people are happy and don't take life too seriously. Okay, I'll live with that. I might go because perhaps the people are nice in the city. He continues to say that Manchester is accessible, and he backs this up by telling us about the Metro link that would delight even Londoners. Yeah, so I've got 2 details about the place. Now, I might not want to put 2 ticks, but certainly I'm going to put a tick somewhere that he's picking out some details, or she's picking out a couple of details that would make me think Manchester might be okay to go to. Lots of people would go to Manchester because of the superb museums. There's an attraction I might want to see. Yeah, I'll put a little tick against that. And lots of them are free. Yeah, that's not a bad point for me. If I've got my family with me to go and know that it's not going to cost me a fortune, that's an attraction as well. He says Manchester is perfect for families because of attractions such as Legoland Discovery Centre. Yeah, so how does he prove it? He's telling me it's a good place to go for family. Can you give me an example of somewhere to go? He calls the restaurants funky and stylish and his hotel seriously cool. Yeah, okay. Picks out the details, but then gives me a comment as well. This gives a modern feel, to the city, and would persuade the younger generation to go. Now, this candidate, I bet, probably has done the Sheffield leaflet, because I'm looking at families, I'm looking at these words like funky and stylish. It's going to appeal to younger people. He appeals to the older generation with live jazz. Yeah, nobody young likes jazz. And dusty record shops. But notice the use of quotation again. It's targeted, it's concise, succinct, it does the job. He proves couples would like it by mentioning places for them to canoodle in dark corners. Yeah, and again, put a tick against that. Might have done a bit more with the language of the cosy canoodling. Interesting that most of the answers I saw picked out, where is it? Let's have a look. The couples canoodling in the jazz club. Most picked that out because they wanted to tell me that it was alliteration. But actually, what he's saying here is there's that coziness, that intimate feel, that kind of ambience of the place that makes people, couples there feel they've got a place to themselves, they're not going to be overlooked and not everybody's looking at them. There's a coziness to it. And that's what I would have wanted the student to focus on in terms of looking at how the language is helping to sell it and make it sound as though it's a place worth going. Now, those two examples, I think, are probably at either ends of the spectrum. I would not be uncomfortable at all saying that second one that we've looked at there gets an A star. It does the job. It shows how Manchester is a good place for a city break. And yet, it's being done quickly, succinctly, it uses the text well, it uses those quotations and those details that do the job. Now that is what markers are looking for. So I would be using these two, I am using these two examples with students to show the difference between something that is vague, loses the question, doesn't get focused, and someone who is really focused on the question, knows exactly what they've got to do, uses the text well, doesn't have time, they won't have time to use all of that, and they certainly won't have time to mention the 14 different attractions. But if they mention half a dozen of them, if they mention 4 or 5 of them, and they pick out some of the language, they're going to be in with a shout at those top band of marks, because they're doing what the question's asking. What are his thoughts and feelings about Old Trafford and Manchester United? They had the second page of that text to look at. So again, as soon as I'm working with kids, I'm saying to them, as soon as you see the question, thoughts and feelings. So what words are you going to use in your answer? He thinks, he feels. He thinks, he feels. And use the text as your evidence. Now, this is where making students or getting students familiar with the mark scheme is really very useful indeed. It's empowering, it helps them to see what the markers are looking for, and it helps them to see how they can move up the line, as it were, to push into those very high marks. Now, if you look at the mark scheme for that question, which is on page 17 of booklet 5, if you put that in front of a student and said, okay, look at the passage, the question says, what are his thoughts and feelings? Now, what do you notice about the way the bullet points are structured, or the way the bullet points are phrased? The number of times the bullet points are saying, he thinks, he feels, he thinks. So, in your answer, do it like that. Make sure that you structure your answer in exactly the same way. So again, not a difficult question, but a lot of candidates that I saw didn't use think or feel in one sentence, never mind over and over again. Very quickly on the last question, again, people will have, I'm sure, will have, again, Sheffield comes to mind here. Here's a question, compare and contrast. We know that looking at two texts in a short time is hard. We know that they'll have read those two texts for the other questions, but it's still tough. And so we try to make those that final question either a collation of detail or focused on very specific things, as here, weather, restaurants, people. Very quickly on to foundation tier, which was about my friend Simon Cowell. I thought we'd try and go for something that most students would at least have a passing kind of reference to. So we used part of Cowell's autobiography and an article about Simon Cowell, who befriended a young girl who had been in a hospice, and their friendship flourished and so on, and he spent a lot of time with the family and helped them out. First question, search and find. I make absolutely no apology for that. We know that G grade candidates are entered for this exam, and quite rightly too, they get their certificate. and a lot of that is going to be from search and find, locating the detail type activities, so I don't make any apology for that. If it says list 10 things, that's what they have to do. They don't have to write an essay. They can bullet point or can number. If they put 11 points, that's fine. It gives them a little bit of insurance if they get one wrong. However, what I did see this time, and again it may be because the kids were all year 10 and maybe had not practiced it as much as those students who had taken the legacy in year 11. List 10 things, fine. What they list has got to make sense though. In the opening of the passage that they looked at, and one other thing that just to say, it did say list 10 things from the first half of the page or the first column. I saw quite a lot of answers that came from the other part of the text. So they've got to know what they're doing. They've got to list the stuff, but they've also got to do the methodical reading and pick out those 10 details that we find out about this girl, Sian Tolfrey. Just very quickly, that first paragraph, it talks about Simon Cowell. When he celebrated his 50th birthday, there was one special lady on his arm. Not a glamorous new girlfriend or talented new star, but a young girl he calls Trouble, and with whom he's shared a special bond for 7 years. Now, he calls her Trouble. It's his nickname for her. So, what do we learn about Sian Tolfrey? Simon Cowell calls her Trouble. Candidates who wrote bullet point Trouble didn't get rewarded because Trouble wasn't the answer. He called her Trouble. He shares a special bond with her. That got a mark. He's known her for 7 years. That got a mark. But I saw quite a lot of candidates who either picked stuff out from the wrong side of the wrong bit of the text that they hadn't been told to look at, or they kind of reduced their answer as much as they possibly could to a one-word response. Now, there were some things they might have got away with as a 1 or 2 or 3 word response, but some of the answers needed to be, if not a complete sentence, then it needed to make sense. For example, this girl had a lot of had some heart and lung operations. I saw an answer that said heart and lung. I didn't give them a mark. I saw answers that told me that, that in the passage it says that she had spent 4 months on a life support machine. Some candidates wrote life support. Didn't get a mark. It has to answer the question. And I think, as back in the classroom, I would encourage your department, teachers in the department, to be tough with them if they're not precise. Do it now, and they'll be precise in the exam. Question 3, Simon Cowell admits he's rude. What explanations does he give for his rudeness? Look at the first 2 paragraphs. But I saw a load of answers that looked at the first paragraph, and that's it. You can get 2 points from the first paragraph, but you can't get 5. They've got to look at the second paragraph, and that's why the question was structured in that way. So again, easy marks, but some candidates threw them away because they didn't use or didn't follow the instruction, didn't use the text. And some candidates got themselves in a tangle because they copied big chunks of the text instead of saying bullet point or number 1, one reason is, and then a little quotation if they needed to, or in their own words, and then another reason, and another reason. I'm looking for 5 reasons. If they copy 5 lines, they'll probably get a tick for spotting the bit of text, but they're probably losing out on maybe 2 or 3 separate points. It's about the reasons. And some candidates simply copied the text and it didn't answer the question. So all the time, take them back to the question. Again, I hope these will be really powerful texts and questions to use as a mock paper to show year 11 students the kinds of things they need to be up to speed with in the exam. And again, a bit like the higher tier, final question, some kids never reached it, so timing issues again, but what impressions does each text give of him? It wasn't even a compare and contrast, just tell me what impressions you get, and there's that word impressions again. Tell me what impressions you get of Simon Cowell, from his autobiography and from the article? Well, it was pretty clear that in the newspaper article, it was a positive impression. He was a nice man. If you can believe that, you believe anything. But he's kind, he's caring. He cares for Sian. He'll do anything for her. Good relationship with the family as well. So you could get 2 marks for saying he cares a lot for Sian, and he also gets on really well with the family. Because again, easy marks for that. He behaves well. He'll sign autographs when he's in the airport and in a rush. He's generous. He's going to pay for this treatment. Now, some of the kids have actually used that in question 2 to show what we learn about him, and then didn't use it here. So that's a pretty clear impression that he's generous, he's kind, he's caring, he doesn't stand on his own dignity, and so on and so forth. In the autobiography, he's a bit more like we know him when we see him on the telly. He is rude. He says he's just being honest. He's big-headed. He's very successful. He's made a lot of money. He's made people famous. They're dead easy impressions. But a lot of kids said, autobiography, he's rude, but he thinks he's honest. Magazine article, he's nice and he cares for Sian. So you get 4 out of 10. Simple as that. They've got to be able to think, right, there's 10 marks up for grabs here, so I need to say a range of different things. I've put in the pack some examples of responses to the last question, because I thought, again, they might be useful when you're working with students on page 4 and page 5. So there are 4 responses here. They're all genuine. These are real kids who did the exam in June. I wouldn't advise bullet points answers unless it says write a list. I really wouldn't, because I think what you end up with is truncated answers that usually lack explanation. I've seen bullet point answers on higher tier, and I think that is a big, big problem. But even on foundation tier, I wouldn't use them. When I'm in class, I'm saying to students, don't use bullet points unless it says write a list, or it specifically says you may use bullet points, because the chances are you will write in kind of truncated phrases that might not explain your answer carefully enough. So, that first one, very quickly, the first example. In the magazine article, it shows that Simon Cowell is one of the kindest people on earth. Really? I'm not sure about that. It tells us that he's kind. I'm not sure it's quite as generous as that, but I might be kind, and I might put the tiniest of ticks in a bracket, because it's not very precise, but it sort of suggests what you get is a positive impression, and I'd probably give a bit of reward for it, even if it's not entirely precise. Then we've got, he cares about other people than himself. Now that's not true, actually. He cares a lot about Sian, and he cares about her family, but he doesn't care about everybody. There's no suggestion that he cares about everybody he ever comes across. And he would always help people if he could. You know, it's too vague, it's unspecific, it's imprecise, and it wouldn't get reward. He has a great friendship with, here we go again, other people. I wouldn't tick that, but I would tick the next bit. And he shows that he cares about Sian and her family. Yeah, okay. I definitely tick that. He does care about Sian and her family. And I'm looking for that part of the answer. 1, maybe 2 marks. But there's a lot missing. If you look at that passage, there's a lot of stuff that this candidate could have selected. Then we've got, look at the autobiography. It shows that Simon Cowell is rude. Yeah, fine, nice, easy, give a tick to that. He doesn't think of what he's going to say on the show. I need a bit more, because I'm not sure he says that precisely. I mean, it may be the case, but it's not what he says in his autobiography. He would give people advice. I think he does more than that. He doesn't really care about the contestants. Well, there's perhaps a little bit of something there, but I actually wrote, when I marked this one, there's more to say. And that's the danger of a bullet point, that you think you said something, but actually you could have explained it in a little bit more detail. And then finally, he said he doesn't mean to be rude. And that's what we learn about him. That's the impression we get, that he doesn't really want to set out to be rude, except in certain circumstances. Now, whatever you think of where the ticks might go, it's hard to think you've got much more than 4 for that. Now, 4 is pretty desperate if you're looking to get a C grade out of being a foundation candidate. So you've got to do more than that. You've got to get this range of detail in. I'll flick very quickly to the final one. Just so that you're aware, the second one, under that first one, got a mark of 6. Better, but 6 is only going to get them into a D grade. And as I said, the annotated versions of all of these will be on the website, so you can see exactly where the ticks go and where my comments are as well. Over the page on page 5, that first one would get a C grade. I would give 3 marks to the first section, and you can perhaps decide where you think where that would come. And then I'd give 5 marks for the autobiography. For example, we've got in the second line, he's a rude person. Third line, he's only being honest. Fourth line, he's only interested in the talent. Yeah, go with that. 3 lines up from the bottom, he's a successful businessman. That's a clear impression. And then finally, that last bit of the sentence, he knows that people can become a success with his guidance, which he claims is the right guidance. Another mark, another tick for that. I'd give that 8. And then the final one, at the bottom there, I would give full marks to. I'd be very confident, and I wrote at the end of that, ranges well across the text, so you get a variety of impressions. As I say, the annotated versions will be on the website, so you can obviously get the marks and the ticks for all 4 of those. And I say to the kids, look, when I'm marking this, I'm putting ticks exactly where I want to give reward, so you can see how it matches the mark scheme. Now, get kids used to that, and what you've then got are students who go into that exam as confident candidates, empowered by their knowledge of how the mark schemes are going to work, and what markers are going, and how the markers are going to reward them. Okay, I'm aware that I'm already late. I failed me Ofsted again. But in the pack, we've put in some examples of the writing unit stuff, where you'll remember that they had to do a piece of formal letter writing, where they had to give their views about a plan for a supermarket to be built in the local area, where it was being built over a sports field and a children's playground. And the second task was they had to write a kind of talk to older people, trying to convince them of the advantages of the internet and and computers. Now, the tasks on this occasion happen to be the same across both tiers. Sometimes they may be slightly different. We'll usually try to have at least one of the tasks the same, but we're simply saying on the writing unit, you may get the same tasks, they may be slightly different. If it's the same task, we'll probably try, as we did here, to give the foundation candidates some handholds. So in the supermarket letter, whereas the higher tier candidates were told the plan is to build the supermarket on children's playing fields, sports fields and children's playground, write your letter giving your opinion. In foundation tier we said some people think the idea is good because it will create more jobs and give more variety to shoppers. Some people think it's bad because it will put local shops out of business and it will destroy a valuable amenity. So they had some idea of the kind of arguments they could use. And I also told them, write the letter to the newspaper either supporting the proposal or opposing it. Because actually, if you were going to write a letter like that to a newspaper, you would have a viewpoint. You wouldn't say, I think it's a great idea to build this supermarket because of all those jobs and it gives everybody a lot of choice. But on the other hand, I think it's a terrible idea because, and so on. But we saw a lot of letters that did that. So on foundation, I actually said to them, take one stance and pursue it. They didn't all do that, of course, because that's the nature of year 10s. But we would, on foundation tier, we would try and give them a steer. Now, if you feel your students benefit from that steer, that's one of the considerations for you to make about which tier you want to put them in. But again, if you're going to use this in the January as a mock, or you're going to use it in a mock before the January, then that will help you perhaps to decide, can they manage as a higher tier candidate without some handholds, or having done this, might I be better putting them in where perhaps the foundation tier might give them a little bit of a handhold. And obviously that's a decision for you based on the kind of the stuff that you see day in, day out from students. The examples that we've got are taken from both tiers. So you've got, for example, on page 7, quite a long letter, but it's a bit naive, and it's got that contradiction of, I'm supporting it, no I'm not. Yes I am, no I'm not. And there's quite a number of sort of simple errors, bit of clumsiness. That ended up on the DE borderline. So if it were entered for higher tier, it would be somewhere around a mark of about 7, possibly 8. On foundation tier, it would be a mark of 12, possibly 13. So DE borderline for that letter. The one over the page on page 8, as it happened, was from a foundation tier candidate, and you can see when you get a chance to read it that what this candidate is doing is actually using those, if you like, handholds that they were given in the question to structure their paragraphs, and that clearly had worked for this candidate, because what you've got here is good structure, good organisation, and that argument being built and developed. And one of the things that I say to students when I'm working with them on this writing unit is, what you really want here, if you've got this kind of task, you probably want 3 or 4 arguments. Each argument should be a separate paragraph, and here's your topic sentence. Let's introduce the paragraph with a topic sentence, and then let's build on that, just that topic, nothing else, but I want you to give me 4 or 5 or 6 sentences that build around that topic that you've introduced, because then you will have developed the argument. And there are ways of doing that, and once with a bit of practice, students can see that actually you can prepare for this exam by thinking in terms of, how am I going to structure this kind of response? And that will work for an article, it will work for an informal letter, it will work for a review. 4 ideas, each of them become a topic, and I'm going to develop that topic into a paragraph. That candidate got a good C. On foundation tier, it was the debate was around, is it 17 or 18? If it were a higher tier candidate, the mark would be around 12. The other thing to say about that particular candidate, it was a foundation tier candidate, but it was pretty accurate as well. Now I'm saying to kids, when you go into this exam, there are 1/3 of the marks for technical accuracy. So it's no good telling me you want to get a C grade if you can't spell a word like business, or minute, or queue, because they are words you've got to learn, because you're likely to use them. And I've actually got, here's my list of 30 spellings that I see every time candidates do a piece of writing. I'll see these mistakes, and they'll be the ones that I know you will tear your hair out as well. Your and your, where and were, there and there, those familiar niggly ones that we see that Stuart's talked about, they should be the ones that are getting underlined, because they're going to use them in their writing CA, and they're going to get them wrong in the exam. So if you get those right, you've got a fighting chance of getting a better technical accuracy mark. Very quickly on, because I'm aware that people have got their tongues hanging out and desperate for food. The one over the page that begins, Dear Sir, Madam, I am writing to put forward my views on how the local area will benefit and also suffer, was on the borderline of an A grade, B grade. So this was from a higher tier candidate. Again, it struggled a little bit because it was trying to deal with both arguments equally, and that made it feel a bit uneasy. But it was on the A-B borderline again, mostly accurate, one or two little spelling mistakes and slips and so on, but pretty sound and pretty secure. And again, you'll get the commentary on the secure website. And then finally, the talk to the older people about the use of computers and the internet. Key thing here that I'm sure that you hammer: purpose and audience. What am I trying to do? Who am I doing it to? Can I adapt my content or shape the content to fit my audience? So I've got those older people in mind. So the benefit of the computer and the internet is not how I can play across the world on the Xbox, quite so much as some candidates said, and you can get your knitting patterns off the web as well. They were thinking about their audience, and it's that shaping the content to suit your audience. So we put in, I think, 3 examples. The first one, very few ideas, plenty of errors, gets in a tangle. That's an E grade you're looking at there, and doesn't help herself on the first line by misspelling gentleman, and then having a comma splice on the at the end of the second sentence. And then over the page, we've got a piece from My Name is Charlotte. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charlotte. She goes on and on and on how she managed it in the time, and the marker comment was, yeah, it's CB, I'd buy a computer to shut her off. So top end of C grade, maybe an argument for bottom end of B grade on that one. So if it were a foundation tier, you're looking at 17, 18. If you're looking at higher tier, you're looking at about a mark of 12. And then the final one gets an A star, full marks, does everything. It's both informative, but it's also persuasive. It makes you want to go and buy a computer if you are wary of them. So very aware of the audience. It's also very accurate. It's also reassuring. And I did write on the better pieces of work that I saw, reassuring for the intended audience, because that's part of the purpose of this. I'm trying to tell you, don't be frightened of the internet. It's got a lot of advantages and so on. So tone, but particularly, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to inform and I'm trying to reassure. And doing that, in a sense, will help them persuade.